Let's just make breaks if possible. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين نبينا وإمامنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين. That was the usual introduction in Arabic, which is praising the Almighty and invoking praise and salutation to His final messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We will come to messengerhood and prophethood later, but let us continue a bit from where we deviated a little bit last time when we discussed the scientific revolution and humanity being like someone coming out of age and being jubilant that he is detecting that he has manhood or femininehood. I am now mature, I am capable, and becoming overconfident. So this overconfidence applies to science, to any endeavor. If you start some new endeavor, some new business, new job, and you are successful, then you will become drunk of pleasure of success in the first phase, and you may become overconfident. You cannot blame the people to be overconfident in scientific achievements, because science has proven itself to be solid, reliable, because it has internal and external controls. Its internal control is that it's based on experimentation, controlled experiment, not haphazard experiments, which is supposed to be repeatable and controllable everywhere. So if a scientist claims any result, then he has to show how or it is derived from theories and equations which must have been themselves developed from previous experimentations and controlled observations, repeated controlled observations. And the controlled observation, I mean, like observing the stars. Or for example, if you observe human behavior, then you observe really humans who are not aware that we are observing them, so it does not change their behavior. Like with a hidden camera, observe so many, because we know humans have quite a number of variations to see what is the main trait, analyzing that properly, comparing it. And if we want to claim it as a human behavior, then it must be the same in London, the same in Russia, otherwise it's a socially conditioned behavior. All of that had to be sorted out and analyzed properly. So that's the control experiment. The same applies with the experiment. The experiment is even better, because the experiment you do it. You have the situation created in the lab and the clearly well-defined conditions. You use certain well-developed equipment which is supposed to be measuring what you expect to measure, because you have an expectation. Before every experiment you have something to be expected. For example, it is no way you are going to, obviously first of all you notice that the famous phenomena that if we don't take care for them, like for some in the train tracks, if you don't take care of that they expand by heat and not give gaps, then they twist and they fall, and the people were surprised first of all what's happening there, and they recognized with the heat they have expanded, and that's the reason they twisted, so they kept a gap. Now a scientist say, but this process must have certain rules, and so he now does an experiment with certain metal rods in which he does the measurement of the length. And then he increases the temperature and see the increase and plot things. So he's expecting something in that direction. He's not bringing a colorimeter and measuring the color. He's not watching for the color. He's watching for the length, for example. So he knows, even in every experiment, you're starting with some previous information and some guess and some expectation. So it's not completely that you come to the experiment completely with empty mind. That's not possible. Then it's not an experiment. It is just baby play, who's still detecting the universe around him. So that's how the experiment works, and you have results, and then you are not having only one scientist in that specific field. You have many scientists in various countries. Some of these countries are hostile to each other, so you can safely assume that the result will be double-checked. Many of the results have applications, industrial issues related to economy, but also military applications, especially in physics, nuclear, chemistry, chemical weapons, etc. So the other power will be competing with you. They will not let you get away with advancement alone. So they will advance with you. And if they read about any experiment or any result, they will double check it and verify it. So ultimately you have a scientific community which corrects each other, and you have an experiment which can be repeated in case you are doubting the result. And then you have the human mind who is sitting before that and analyzing it and try to write it in a neutral language, like the language of mathematics, or the language at least of formula, like in chemistry. And that science has been extremely successful in developing considerable number of technological advancement, radio, television, nuclear weapons, nuclear reactors, electricity, etc. So there's nobody doubting that science is valid. And nobody should doubt that science is valid and produce firm knowledge. So the people became jubilant to the level that in the 19th century and early 20th century, some philosophers said anything which cannot be accessed by experience, experimental observation, this is a general term which we experience, is not a knowledge. It's called metaphysics, and metaphysics does not exist. So all knowledge must come from an experimentation, an observation, from experience, from sensual experience, ultimately, because all experiments ultimately end that we receive information with the senses. What is not accessible to the senses is nonsense. It's just pure metaphysics, which is nonsensical. But this stand, obviously, this is obviously the young man coming out of age and rebelling against his own father, dad. His dad is the reason, rebelling against reason, because reason assumes that there are absolute, logical absolutes and truths which are built in reason. Reason cannot be defined without them, and if you don't have these, you cannot have anything, neither science nor make any sense of the sense experience. And the refutation is very simple. If someone says no truth can be ascertained except by experimentation, this is a general statement. But it's a metaphysical state, because there's no experiment which verifies all other possible experiments. It does not exist. This is a generalization which is non-experimental. This is a metaphysical claim. This is a metaphysical claim. And that this metaphysical claim disproves itself. It is internally contradictory. Because if it is true that no truth can be ascertained and reached to except by experimentation, then that claim itself cannot be experimentally verified. So it is false. So if it is true, it's false. What does it mean? Either you accept that something can be true and false at the same time, in the same instance, meaning reason is, then you are welcome to go to the mental institution if you wish, that's no problem. And you can just simply say, I'm not in a mental institution, but I am in the mental institution at the same time. That's obviously that will never work. So this so-called positivism, or logical positivism, or extreme empiricism, all these philosophies must collapse immediately, because they make such a general sweeping statement which will undermine itself immediately by itself. Like the famous, Crete, the island of Crete, that's one man of Crete said, all people of Crete, all people of these islands are liars. And he himself is also the island, so we'll end in a situation which is impossible. If he's telling the truth, then he must be a liar, so we cannot trust him. And if he's lying, then he is refuting his own statement, so it is impossible. That's one of those so-called self-referencing statements which will refute themselves, which end into being absurd. So it's absurd. It can't be. It's no way you can have such a generalized statement unless you have, it's a necessity of reason, or it will collapse. You cannot verify it by any experimentation. So that's this point. So this extreme philosophical point has been gone. There are truths which are built in the mind, or part of the mind as being a mind. Otherwise it doesn't make any sense. Languages lose their meaning. Sciences lose their meaning. It's very well possible someone could assert metals expand by heat. And someone said they don't expand. Say, but you prove by experiment. Yes, you prove by experiment that they do expand, but they don't expand, because the two statements are possible. There's no logic, absolute contradiction is impossible. Simple. I finish. No knowledge is possible with that. So I think that we handle that philosophical aspect.
So then how do you handle people like that? Because you come across people who...
The best thing is to leave them until they commit suicide. They commit suicide, and then you will recognize that you are dead and alive at the same time. Nothing can be done about it. Just leave him until he is out of this phase of sickness.
Is there not a...
No, a rational person will immediately recognize this is false and say, oh, I give up positivism.
It's not rational, that's sincere, but I'm saying is that, but to...
Just leave it. Some people will stubbornly say, no truth will be ascertained except... Say, truths about the universe. Yes, but we are not talking about the universe only. There's other non-universe part. One part of it is that statement, is the universe eternal or non-eternal? This cannot be ascertained by any real experimentation in the sense. Directly, it needs some rational process. The principle of contradiction itself cannot be tested experimentally, because every experiment will assume that in the background before you start with it. Because if you do an experiment, you assume there is a result which will be coming out. for this experimental circumstances, and that you can rely on them to be true. But if you assume the principle of a contradiction to be false or unreliable, then maybe they are true and false at the same time. So it doesn't make any sense. These extreme positions can be annihilated easily, and they have been finished actually. There was in time of when sometimes some of the philosophers, when they start a new philosophy or a new system of philosophy, they are so like small child. They are very jubilant, and they make statements which sound like most like poetry rather than really philosophy, like poetic statements, and they will not stand any rational, strict, cold rational scrutiny. We know in the age of science, everything is asserted by experimentation. Why not assume that experimentation should expose all possible truths? No, expose only truths about material things, material objects in the universe. Yes, because they are accessible to experimentation. But there may be other entities in existence which are not accessible to any experimentation. We need other tools of reason to access them. So that's this one. So this extreme trust in science has been considerably undermined now. Initially, science, because many of scientists in Europe, as we discussed in previous discussion, were obviously feeling that if they go to the scripture they have inherited and they have respect for, because they are part of the history. That means the Judeo-Christian scriptures, because Quran is not accessible for them. For them, is that something foreign and something hostile. They don't need to bother even looking at it. They don't bother looking at it from the beginning. Indian scripture like the Gita and so on, and other Persian scripture, they are like the famous Orient, the mysterious Orient, where there are spices and jewels available in the street like stones. You know the old myths of 1001 Night. They're on an island where actually the stones are diamonds, and you just need to get there and then you become rich, and all these dream in the dream world. For them, these like that, because if you read those, they contain so many stories which are evidently so mythical that you cannot start any scientific discourse. Like, for example, the universal cycle in the Gita, which takes 36 trillion years, and that repeats itself and so on. There's not even one shred of physics which should corroborate that or synchronize with it to any great extent or any. Besides the philosophy behind it, and the metaphysics is itself faulty. It's more like a poetry rather than really a real philosophy. So they read that, but the moment they read it, they say, "Oh, this is even worse in matter of." But it is a very nice poetry. Maybe a nice piece of art. That's all. Like you read the Iliada and Odyssey, etc., the stories of the Greek. You know, it's mythical, but it's enjoyable. You could make a movie out of it, that's it. But the only one real alternative which could be of serious challenge to them, the Quran, that's no reasonable man in Europe should look at the Quran. Why look at the Quran? This is a sad book of savages, and these Muslims were savages, that's all. It's not worth looking at. And the Church has always through the centuries indoctrinated the people that touching even this book is a problem. Don't touch it. It's in the index. It should not be touched. And only the opening to the world and the interaction forced them to get out of that. The moment they went out of that, they faced problems of insurmountable type, which they are still facing, ideological fields and the field of da'wah. And they faced the fact that they are never were able to convert any relevant numbers of Muslims, of educated Muslims, to Christianity, while the opposite direction was extraordinary and massive. So they were another state of shock. But now with secularization and the world being open and what they call globalization and the world becoming the global village, things are changing and they are forced. And then with the issues of jihad and they call terrorism and so on, they are forced to face that. But they're facing it at the trivial level of war and peace. I'm not saying trivial level. From a philosophical point of view, this is trivial. Because the deeper issues which lead to war and peace have been neglected. And that's the reason they tried, for example, to hijack some Muslim scholars who are relatively innocent, simple-minded, or teachers to issues fatwa about there's no suicide bombing in Islam, like the recent one of Dr. Tahir al-Qadri and so on. I know that man, I have met him. I think he's quite innocent, but quite simple-minded. He's quite simple-minded. So he may be very convinced that there is no suicide operations in Islam or martyrdom operations, but they are not legitimate. Some scholars have said that, I must say, in time past. This is very well possible. But that he gives the fatwa now and try to find all that in this context shows that his political lack of savviness and sophistication, that's all. It's not a matter of truth or falsehood, it is another deeper matter more sinister matter of a political and imperialist agenda, but he doesn't have the tools learned in his madrasa or from his own teachers to analyze the world in this state. But this is not our issue. We're not discussing these social and political issues, but show you that the level of confrontation and struggle is the level of military operation, jihad, political system. That's important, no doubt. But that all comes from a background of philosophical issues of higher value, issues of existence of God, issues of secularism, issues how to run life in principle, issues of morality, and they are higher. And these are connected deeper philosophical issues. They cannot be just brushed over them by saying this is the way savages do things, this is the way, this is backward. It's backward only for the European, because for them that is past. But for other nations it is the future, maybe. So it doesn't work. Especially since they, being secular, they have no frame which they can call it an absolute frame of truth in matter of morality. So that's, but back to our issue. So this is the situation. As I said, science has become a little bit more modest. Scientists have become more modest, disciplined. They faced originally the area theories in the last, in the 19th century, for example, where the universe is infinitely expanded and infinitely in time, both extended everywhere in space and time. And if you look with the telescopes of this time, you will keep seeing stars further away until they become small and they become invisible. All what you can say, the resolution of my apparatus is limited. I can't see beyond that because my apparatus is limited, and I know from theoretical calculation, simple optical calculation, that I can't see anything sharp by this and this distance. And the first shock was the so-called Olber paradox, because Olber said if the universe is really infinitely extended in space and in time, then the sky cannot be dark at night, because yes, it is dark at night because the space outside, because they are not directed in the sun direction, but they will be because it's infinite in time and there are many places there and stars. They have infinite time to reach their light, to reach us, so the whole space should be filled with light, actually with infinite hot. It can't be dark like that. It was the first one, just using simple optical principles and the distribution of light. Some people say, oh, no, it will be absorbed by the interstellar matter. But this doesn't work, because absorption has its own limitation. It will be absorbed, but if matter absorbs light or radiation in a certain frequency, it will radiate some of it in another frequency. So it's an equilibrium process. So ultimately matter will be all evaporated and there will be only gas state. Even worse, so it doesn't work. Just with simple classical physics of the 19th century, an infinitely extended universe, then they came to the stationary one because of the relativistic theory that can be expanded forever and expand without beginning. So you go back in time until time, which you could call zero or minus infinity. It doesn't matter because you can never reach it asymptotically. It's very difficult to grasp, but you can do the mathematics. They call it past completeness. I said, oh, even despite the expansion, so we have solved the problem of Olber paradox. But still there's a dark night. It will be like that for all eternity, but because it's expanding, and in expanding universe you can fix things so that you have dark nights, you don't have these problems with Olber. But for that you have to have it past complete, that it goes back ad infinitum, smaller and smaller, but asymptotically, somehow. From inside it looks asymptotic, but from outside, but there's no outside whatsoever, because if the universe is always that deep, then there's no outside. But you can control it by strict mathematical calculation. But it has been proven now, in past has been proven that an expanding universe must have a beginning, which is a singularity. But some intelligent physicists came forward and found other models which do not satisfy certain energy conditions, which may be complete in the past. But now it has been proven, maybe, not that they prove that it's there. There's nobody proved that the universe is complete in the past. Nobody has proven. It's only a possibility. Now it has been proven that under extremely wide ranging conditions provided in this level of the size of the universe, that the general theory of relativity is valid. Whatever you go in the past, it is never complete. You have a beginning, you have some kind of singularity. So we are stuck with the problem of the universe. So the universe did not exist forever, it started existing. So you have to face that problem. That's from one point. But this is, again, start taking that. This is only a bit of information you take on board as a guideline. You should not give that too much weight, because there will be the following issues to settle. Even if it's in a mathematical form, it can be proven that it is complete in the past, meaning it existed always, wherever time is defined. It will still have the following point, that from inside the universe, when you look from inside, it will have to go to a 0 point, to a time called 0, which is the beginning of time, space and time. So the claim has always existed, meaning time started, universe started, all of it started. For that, time and space are not defined. Do not make any sense to define them. But mathematically, which is mathematics itself is part of logic and rationality, you can still go out of the universe in a mathematical model, and that's very well possible even mathematically, because the universe is a complicated manifold. For example, let me give you an example of manifold is the surface of a sphere. That's a similar one. The surface of the sphere, you can imagine the sphere embedded in a three-dimensional space, or the surface itself two-dimensional. There's also, you go north-south or east-west. This has two dimensions, but it is because it's twisted and closed like that, it cannot be forced into 2 dimensions. Only a circle can be there, or like a piece of like this, like a flat sheet, which circular. But something which is like closed like that, it has to be in 3 dimensions. The same, even a more complex 2-dimensional surface is the surface of the car tire, which is like torus, donut shape, the donut shape. You cannot force it to it. It is 2-dimensional, but it cannot be forced. It has to be embedded in. But you can decide, imagine the torus is 3-dimensional. You don't need to imagine. Just go look at your car tire after being blown. It's a torus. It's in 3 dimensions, no problem. But then sometimes even more messy and complex manifolds, which are so twisted that they need higher dimension to be embedded in. But there is a general proof by Whitney in differential geometry that any manifold, differential manifold, this is locally smooth. You can define small directions and movements in a small area. Any manifold can be embedded in a space which is twice its dimension plus 1. So if a 2-dimensional, very twisted, maybe not be embeddable in 3, but it can be embedded in 2 times 2, that's 4, plus 1, 5. In 5 dimensions, you will embed everything 2-dimensional. It can twist as much as like, it will go in 5 dimensions. Now the real universe is 4-dimensional in space and time, but even if you assume there are dimensions which have been compactified, which have been hidden from us, 6 or more, it's 11, 10 actually, 4 plus 6, 10. Some people say 11. And one of them is time-like. There are various theories still, theoreticians are playing with them and see which one will produce a good physics. They're still in the phase of guessing. In such a universe can be embedded into, let's say, 10 times 2, 20 plus 1 in 21 dimensional space. So it's possible mathematically to embed that and look from outside. And then you will have to answer the following question. This is a rational question now. That entity, if you look at it from outside, it looks like from a point, from the outsider, and expanding like a balloon, ballooning out from a plane, from a starting point. And if you draw it stationary, make time as an axis, then obviously time development will appear as a shape on this diagram. If we look at that, we will face the problem again in this surrounding universe, which is an empty space now, but there's an observer, and reason can analyze that in a rational way. We will have the problem with the initial condition, the initial parameters. Meaning, we still face the issue that the universe may have certain laws which seems to be well established and necessary, but there are 3 parameters which have been fixed in the initial moment. So the mere proof that it is past complete, that you go, all what it says is that you can go to 0 safely from inside and start from 0. That's all what it can say from a rational point of view. Physical point of view, it has certain physical implications. But from a rational point of view, it doesn't solve the problem of being the universe being contingent or non-contingent yet. For that to prove the universe, and that's what I addressed once in a previous remark, that when the atheists say it's unfair to ask us to prove that God does not exist because nobody can prove a negation. That's not the way it should be formulated. Yeah, some theist and some believer, like one in the YouTube, was challenging the atheist to prove that God does not exist. The way he formulated it is wrong. I agree with the atheist that they are right to say it's unfair to ask us to prove something does not exist. That's the onus is the proof of the one who. But actually, the claim that God does not exist, the atheist claiming, is equivalent for us being in this universe, which they cannot deny that it exists. Because they say all what is there is this universe. There is nothing behind it or nothing before it. It is all the reality is there. There is no other entity called God beside this universe. Meaning, by necessity of reason now, not by any experimentation. You don't need to do the recent theoretical development that the universe under very general condition, which is called the border Gut-Villain-Key theory. We don't need all of that in that stage. You need just a rational point which asks, is this universe a necessarily existing being? Does it have all the condition of its being in itself? Is it self-contained rationally? So it does not need for its explanation anything else. This is what we call contingency or necessity. And this is a rational necessity. Anything in existence, even any statement or theory is either contingent or it has its truth in itself. Any theory is self-contained or not self-contained. There's no escape.
What do you mean by that? Can you expand a little bit more with that?
For example, let us take one example of the natural number 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Gödel has proven that they have certain initial axioms that this is a formalization of the rules of addition and multiplication and so on. So for starting that, we have a natural number called 1, another one called 0, there's nothing there, and 1. From that we can generate 1, 2, 3, 4 ad infinitum with the known rules of addition. That 2 plus 2 will bring 4. 4 divided by 2 will bring 2, etc. This axiom system will produce a set called natural numbers. But there is a statement, you can make statement about certain natural numbers, very complex statement, by the way. There's no way to visualize them for the common man or even for the specialist. These statements are so that you cannot prove them from these axioms alone. You have to take something from outside. So you could say the theory or the axiomatic system of the natural numbers is incomplete. Because it produces the set of natural numbers. It's in front of you. We know 0, 1, 2, 3. Some people do not add the 0 sometimes. It's 1, 2, 3, 4 ad infinitum. We know the features of it. We know plenty about features of natural numbers, their oddities, prime numbers, etc. We can prove that prime numbers never end. They'll go ad infinitum. You know the famous, very simple proof. All these can be proven easily. But there are some statements, very complex, almost unexplainable in common man language, which cannot be proven within this axiom system. You have to go outside to a bigger system to prove them, if ever. This is called the Gödel's incompleteness proof. Yeah, human mind has achieved great successes in the past century. One of them is the Gödel incompleteness proof of the natural number system and certain other axiomatic systems. Certain axiomatic systems, some of them are incomplete. There are statements in them which make sense, you can formulate them, but you can neither prove them or disprove them.
Okay, so linking this back to what you were saying is that...
But now we take about something existing, physical reality. Does it have all its condition of existence built in itself or not? For that to prove, so what we are asking the atheist, what we asked earlier, is that prove that the universe is necessarily existing. For that you have to prove that this set of equations is the only one which can be realized. Yeah? There's no other set of equations which describe any possible universe. They are like for example, it has been proven generally and a very general assumption that any two-dimensional in space universe, I mean three-dimensional total, one time and two dimension, is unstable. It cannot exist. That anything more than 3 plus 1, what the one we have, if we have other dimensions, then they have most likely, I think it has been proven now, must have to go down and be compactified in small. So we have to have 4. And maybe another one. So you have to prove that's the only one. There's no other one possible. That's number one. Secondly, that this set of laws, because in this 4-dimensional space there are so many mathematical equations and differential equations of various types, most of them are not realized in this universe. Why? They are possible, and mathematicians work with them, because the universe needs to be consistent and existence only this set of equations. You have to prove that it's the only one. Then you face the problem with the initial condition. This, I think, this problem is unsolvable. That's where atheism will collapse ever. Whatever they do, it's not going to work. Is that all these equations do not contain the parameters needed for the development to start from a certain stage. There are certain parameters which have to be chosen from the beginning in such a way. There's no escape from that. It's impossible to avoid that. Unless they get a theory which produces all parameters from its belly, from inside, not to be put from outside from experimentation. They can't. To give an example, simple example for the viewer about what we mean with initial condition, like for example, if you shoot with a gun a bullet or a projectile, we know the equations of motion. If we know the friction of the air, so let's assume we know that all in perfection. We know it approximately, because it's very complex. But in principle, it's knowable. It will not give you the trajectory exactly until you specify the starting point of the shot. And how to specify the starting point, the equation will not dictate that. Who dictate that? The commander of the artillery battalion. You say, put the gun there. And another time you say, put it elsewhere. And you see, use the gun today, maybe in a fight, like for example, the fight 25 years ago or 30 years ago between Vietnam and China, use it to shoot at Chinese armies if he's a Vietnamese commander. And 15 years earlier, he used it to shoot in another place against the Americans. The same law applies, but the initial place of the gun is different. And who fixed it? The commander. So the laws don't dictate where to start. You have to put the starting point to find the real trajectory. This is the initial condition. Here, the one specifying it is the commander of the army, to a great precision, with few millimeters, but it's enough for the battle, the conditions in the battlefield. But has to be specified. So this initial parameter, the starting point, and even the starting speed, he dictates the starting speed. How? Because he orders to load a certain amount of powder. Most big cannons and guns and howitzers, they do use powder in form of bags. They are measured in portion, but he said put 3 bags, 4 bags, because they cannot put so many variations. It will be too difficult to keep the logistics and the supply. So they give him a certain range, and based on that range, he does his calculation. We need 4 bags to get this distance roughly, but because we have 4 bags, the initial speed will be like that, so we have to lift the gun a little bit higher or lower, and things like that. And he calculated, but the initial place and the initial speed to a greater detail is being specified by him. It's not dictated by the law. The laws are the same. The same law which governs the trajectory here while shooting at the Americans when the Americans were still in Vietnam are the same laws which are governing the trajectory when he's shooting at the Chinese in the conflict which happened 10 years later, something like that. And which settled down quite reasonably without anyone crushing the others. The Chinese would have crushed Vietnam, but it would have been quite bloody. Yeah. So it's the same law. Also, there are other set of boundary conditions about the external air and so on, which have to be worked in, like the air temperature. He put all this information in the equations. So the equations are themselves do not dictate the whole development. They don't tell you, they just tell you possibilities, contingency, contingent, nothing necessary there. Because we have external, so-called boundary conditions, external conditions, and initial conditions. And the same with all equations of physics until now. Yes, we succeeded in slimming many of the experimental parameters, bringing it down to more fundamental constant, like the speed of light, like the Planck constant, which is the fundamental constant in the atomic world, like the gravitational constant, few other fundamental constants, maybe the electric charge, and maybe we can slim that down to maybe fewer parameters than the 4 or 5. But ultimately, you have to have some free parameters, and all equations until now are proven to be impossible to construct, which will produce the parameter internally. Even supergravity, which is only a path theory. I don't think supergravity with fluctuation, quantum fluctuation and so on, or even quantum gravity will be able to do without, although it has only one force, and suppose from the fluctuation the whole universe emerged. Nevertheless, there's one parameter at least there, which is the gravity, the fundamental gravitational constant, and possibly another speed is needed there. So there's no way to avoid that. So when we say when someone asks an atheist to prove that God does not exist, This is an unfair formulation of the fair demand. Prove that the universe is necessarily existing. Its existence is defined by itself completely, and there's no need for any external agent or external whatsoever. Must be the necessarily existing being must be self-contained completely. Does not need anything except self, absolutely, and without any. And all what we see in the universe, but it's both in the very complicated scientific level, which is now going very deep. By the way, the recent experiments in CERN have started touching areas which were only realized near the Big Bang in time past in the history of the universe, because they have collisions in which energies of something like, I think, 6 volt have been achieved. But still, in that complicated level, we have 3 parameters, but also in the simple life around us, which the universe is composed of so many parts and entities. Each one of them is contingent, and there is nothing which persuades anyone who has even the most simple-minded human being to think that it's necessarily existing. It looks contingent everywhere. Its parts are contingent. Human beings are contingent. Mountains are contingent. Stars are contingent. Galaxies are forming and going and passing away over longer times. All of that is coming and going and passing away. Does not show any necessity. So when the simple man looks at that, he will get quite a certitude that everything around me, everything I can describe and point to, is contingent, and there's nothing which persuades me to believe that the whole universe was just composed out of these parts. They may be interacting with each other, but still nothing will persuade me to believe that it's necessarily existing. Because the still existing being cannot be consist of any parts which are contingent. It must be absolutely necessary in every respect. That's for the simple man, which is quite sophisticated at that level, but also for the scientist who is honest and looks at the equation. So that now let me, before we maybe have some discussions, another fallacy which has been widely spread, and some physicists are being sucked in this fallacy either deliberately. I don't think it's deliberate. I think it's that if you work in a certain area for some time, it becomes your life. I don't think this is a certain limited fact becomes an absolute. I gave an example, I think, in a previous also talk, that when we shoot high energetic gamma rays are nothing like X-rays. And X-rays are actually like these light rays, but they are very short length or equivalently very high frequency, high energy. So they can penetrate deep. That's the reason they can X-ray. They can penetrate your body and give a good picture for the physician to analyze which kind of disease or how the state of your organs are, etc. The gamma rays are even more energetic than the X-rays, and they come usually either in cosmic radiations or in nuclear experimentation. They are not usually available with the usual machines of X-rays. And they are not needed. It's simply too dangerous to be in that level to be produced. But it can be produced, like in accelerators and so on, if needed for certain experimentation. Now, a gamma ray, if it comes near to a nucleus, that's the beginning of such time. It can disappear, and instead of it, all of its energy, which is equivalent according to the theory of relativity to mass, all mass and energy are equivalent. They're just different appearances of the same thing, essentially, the same entity which we call mass energy, and 2 electron-like creatures come out. One is the called electron, which is the well-known negatively charged electron, and the other one opposing in direction to conserve certain angular momentum, or like this, going out of each other. It's a positively charged electron. Otherwise, it's exactly like the electron. It's like the twin brother of electron, or the image of the electron, mirror image. Because the electron is charged, this one will have the opposite charge, and all other types of so-called quantum numbers of charge type which can have an opposite, will be opposited. If that's positive, that's negative. But otherwise, mass is the same. But this happens only in the field of the nucleus, but not by touching the nucleus. It happens in the field, in the space around the nucleus, which is supposed to be empty. So it looks like after the gamma quantum or the gamma ray disappeared, and these 2 entities, electron-positron pair, emerged out of nothing. And then when you do that theoretical development, you will find that because of certain indeterminacy in the subnuclear world and nuclear world and the atomic world, subatomic world, is that it is possible that a pair of electron-positron will emerge, but for a very short time, and then they emerge again, and emerge and re-emerge. That's called vacuum fluctuation. That's possible. The equation describes that. And it can be calculated what's the effect of this vacuum fluctuation. But beware, nobody has seen that directly with his own eyes. Only a description, a mathematical model in our mind, which has a very nice image. You can describe it with a very nice image of ray going like this, photon, gamma ray going, any ray, gamma ray, provided if it has enough energy, they emerge in existence, and a partner who will take care of balancing the books of energy, momentum, and rotational momentum. But if no partner is there, they still emerge and recombine, emerge and recombine. This process of emerging and recombining in the surrounding vacuum of particles and along the paths of rays, this process has significant physical effects and significant measurable effects. For example, you may have here that the proton, the nuclear particles called proton and neutron, which are very close to each other. The only difference is that the proton is charged positively, one charge, and neutron is the neutral one. So it's actually a proton plus a few other things. They are composed out of 3 particles called quarks. 3. And by experimentation, by shooting high energetic electrons, you can ascertain that structure, that there are things which can be really, this is there like a bag, and there are 3 items there. So. Besides these, in the space between these quarks, the quarks are bound so they cannot go far away, because the nuclear force has a certain feature which other forces do not have. It will not permit the quarks will never emerge outside the nucleus. They are bound there forever. But their interaction, they are actually supposed to be massless. But a proton is very massive compared to the other elementary particles. So what's happening there? Their interaction with vacuum, quote and unquote, and exchanging certain particles called gluons, that interaction is that will produce the mass. Actually, I was myself involved in calculating the mass of one of the quarks and so on in time past, and then someone in part, just an episode about 20 years back with the late Professor Mahjoub. So that's an experimental situation, and this is the description in macroscopic language, because when we talk about particle, we think it's something like a point, which does not exist in reality. Nothing is really a point, a real mathematical point, or wave, which is very difficult to conceive wave. That's the reason in the 19th century they thought waves is something in a medium called ether, because waves in a pond of water, we throw a stone, the wave is the water is being wavy. Wave in vacuum does not make any sense. So they thought there was something called ether. Something is called the ether, and that ether, or ether, whatever it is that one, the waves. But there are very persuasive, convincing experimentation which have shown this ether must have very, very miraculous features, and ultimately it turns out it must have contradictory features. So it doesn't exist. So it's not ether. It's empty. Now we are back somehow to a bit of ether, the vacuum, which has the fluctuation, but it's another type of ether altogether. So it's strange phenomena, but we, as human beings, which we have eyes and ears, we have to use what we know in the macroscopic world in models. And we have, as long as we can control it properly, write it in form of equations and develop them further, and the results can be corroborated by experiment. There is no reason not to use these models, but keep always in mind, which physicists sometimes, because you work all your life there, you get stuck there, you think it's the reality. It's not. It's a mental representation of a reality which is not accessible to our direct senses. Then when you talk about particle and wave, you are talking about a macroscopic world. And that's what they teach to the students when they come in the high school and then later in the university. They teach them waves, showing the waves in the pond, or the waves on a rope. When you swing the rope, then it becomes wavy. That's the wave we know. Or string instruments, you strike it, and then if you photograph it with high speed, you see, we know that. That's what we see with our eyes. But in subnuclear world, we don't see anything. But this model fits with the equations of waves properly, so it's a wave. But what is it in reality is not accessible to our eyes. So that's remark number one. Remark number two, all of these phenomena of the fluctuation of the vacuum, particle emerging and disappearing, and making the calculation and showing that this will really produce sensible results which we can test experimentally, no doubt about that. So we're using a model of a fluctuating vacuum which has fluctuation, particles who appear and disappear quickly enough. It has to be quick enough so certain inequalities are fulfilled. It can't be arbitrary. And they cannot appear really in existence really unless you have enough energy and enough balancing of the books of energy, mass, momentum. Momentum is the impulse or the push. The push has to be carried out in a certain way. You know that if you shoot with a gun, it will kick you. This is the push. It has to be balanced out. And also the rotation. Rotation is also like a push. A rotational push has to be also balanced. So some partner must be there to balance things. So a gamma ray, even if it has energy to produce millions of electrons, some gamma rays are extremely energetic. They could produce millions of electrons and positron pairs. They go through empty space for billions of years facing nothing, so they produce nothing. They are lonely, nobody's cooperating with them to do the production process. But the moment they come near to a nucleus, a shower of electron positron pairs will come out. So you need a nucleus. You need something to balance the books. We abstract from that and talk about the vacuum, because and the word vacuum has been important because that area is empty, obviously, from particles. But it's not absolutely empty. It is part of the surrounding space in which some particles are there. But you will abstract from all the particles, have a simplified model, put it in the form of equations, and you end talking about the vacuum. That vacuum is a physical state. It's actually, normally, is the state of lowest energy of a system. The lowest energy system. It doesn't describe absolute nothingness. It describes a state where the particles are in the lowest. It's, for example, very well possible if you are studying metals, for example, or studying, better for the listener, studying a silicon chip. If you cool it maybe down to absolute zero or close to it, then you are coming closer to the lowest state of energy. And at absolute zero, you could imagine, if you go to absolute zero, if it's ever possible, then you go to the ground state of the system. That's the lowest possible energy. That will represent in your equation the vacuum. But that's not a vacuum. This is a silicon chip with atoms and electrons there. So it's not an empty nothingness. It is a ground state of a system. So the vacuum is a physical state, which is the lowest state of the appropriate system. We'll talk about the vacuum of the whole universe, meaning the ground state of the whole universe. When we have a vacuum in an experiment in CERN, like the one they did a few weeks ago, or a few months ago, at this 6 teravolt, then it is the state inside the reaction chamber where the two beams collided. It's empty otherwise except the two beams and their implications and the things around them. That's the vacuum. So
that's still not a perfect vacuum?
It's not absolute nothingness, let's say it in philosophical terms. The vacuum which we have in a vacuum bottle is really a very bad vacuum, because in external space we have a better vacuum, because in external space we have maybe every cubic centimeter only one hydrogen atom. Every square is so thin, we will never be able to get that in the laboratory. But this is still not completely empty, and even if we imagine all of these, you can pause it maybe.
Sorry, can.
If you imagine all of these atoms removed, still the interstellar space is full of fields and other things that have been dictated by gravitation, dictated by the stars far away, etc. So it's not an absolute nothingness. So the abstraction of and the way some physicists talk about the vacuum as if it's nothingness, say it is possible to have a fluctuation in nothingness, producing something. This is now carrying the metaphor out of its proportion. And some would even say we can produce a complete universe out of nothingness by a fluctuation. It's not out of it, it must be a vacuum. So even if we have a fluctuation in a vacuum producing a universe, the question arises, what is this vacuum and where it has come from? Maybe that's what you call vacuum is just a divine being, which brings things by free will, because it's a fluctuation, say just arbitrary, You claim it's arbitrary. We could very well claim it is a divine being who does that by a free will. For you, from looking just from physics point of view, from another point of view, it looks like that's all what you say. So what he's saying is that something is there, which is not absolute nothingness, because absolute nothingness will produce nothing. And that may be the divine being we are looking for, but we have to do a little bit more of rational and logical analysis to get further.
And you still require the gamma rays.
So you cannot extrapolate from what is happening inside the universe, an existing universe already, where the empty space in that side of the universe is having fields present and particles already in existence. And you have a model of fluctuation in this vacuum. You cannot extrapolate that before the universe itself existed. That doesn't work this way. This is a jump which is not warranted. This is another fallacy. But most scientists fall in this fallacy. I don't think it's mischievous, it's all because you are working that day and night, and it comes in you think this vacuum is, and the word vacuum indicates in your mind from day to day, if it's empty space, it's not empty. This is not the empty, this absolute emptiness. It's not what you can call in the philosophical term nothingness. The nothingness in the representation of physics, just I remind the one who understands physics for the listener, is that what we represent in the Hilbert space with a zero vector. But the vacuum is represented by a non-zero vector. It's called the vacuum. It has the name V. It's not a zero vector. Just for those who understand the language of Hilbert space, where we represent the state of a physical system by rays. No state of the physical system is represented by the null vector, which is zero length. All of them are represented with a vector of finite length. And the vacuum is one of those, not the zero vector. The zero vector, you can apply whatever you want to an operation, it will remain zero. They know that, physicists know that. But they get carried away with the expression, and they think they have solved the problem of existence by saying, oh, out of nothing something fluctuates. In the universe, we have empty spaces, which you call vacuum, but they are possibly the ground state of the system, or a false ground state of the system. And calling them the vacuum, that does not make them absolute nothingness. It makes them maybe empty of particles, maybe empty of some fields, maybe empty, but they are not empty of space-time. Still space and time are there. And we argue that space and time are part of the universe and they emerged with the universe, or they are existing with the universe forever. So we are still in space-time. Question was, if space-time and the universe started somewhere, but before that there was no space and time. That's not the physical vacuum, that's something else. What is that?
But the question is, we're having like this discussion after the circle, that people call that's still blind faith. There's a leap of faith.
No,
you assume that it's the free agent. You assume it's the creator.
That comes later, but there's something else. That's the point. We're not discussing what is this something else. They claim there's nothing. There's nothingness. Saying nothingness cannot be. That's what I'm saying. What is it? That will have to be assessed by another analysis. They claim you don't need it. It's absolute nothingness. Say no. In the Hilbert space of states, the zero vector does not produce anything. If you apply the so-called creation operators on any state of the system, it will produce another state. But if you apply it on the zero vector, that's really absolute nothingness, the emptiness, real absolute emptiness, it will stay zero forever. With the length zero with no probability. Zero meaning the length zero of a state in the Hilbert space, meaning the probability of the state to exist. Zero means it's impossible.
Yeah.
The zero vector stays zero vector forever. You can apply all creation and they use so-called creation operations which create particles out of the vacuum or out of another state. They have to be applied to a state which is a physical state, which has a finite probability, length not zero. If you apply it to the zero vector, it will stay zero and continue being zero for all eternities. It's not going to change. It's just in the simple theory of the Hilbert space, the zero vector remains zero with all operations of the
that's
theory.
That's not your theory, is it? That's not being tested.
No, this is the representation, because the theory can be represented in a space of states, which let me give an example for let me give an example of two-dimensional states, which we have x-axis, maybe pointing toward the east, like in a map, and y-axis pointing toward the north. Let's assume we have chosen a central point, like for example a certain point in Greenwich, as for example, or anywhere in the world you wish. As I said, imagining the universe is flat, to avoid the complication of a sphere, because the Earth is actually not flat, it's a sphere. It's a flat universe. For an ant, London is quite flat, it's a big universe which is flat. And a certain point is zero, you draw your coordinates, fix that system. Just geometric representations. Then you have arrows pointing from the center anywhere, and then you can apply operations of rotation, rotating them. You can rotate the arrow by a certain rotation of a certain degree. So the arrow pointing to east, if you rotate by 90 degrees, it will become north. Yeah? And then you can rotate all kinds of arrow along, and you can have another operation of stretching an arrow and making it smaller. And all operations, the so-called linear operations, are a combination of both, either stretching or rotation or a combination of both. Now, in the Hilbert space representation of states, it is similar to this. It's like arrows being rotated from another place, which represent more particles, less particles. They have to be applied to a real arrow of real length. If you apply it to the 0 point, if rotated, is still 0. If stretched, is still 0. If shrunk, is still 0. Yeah? That's a 0 vector. It is 0 for all eternities. All these operations will leave it as a 0. In the Hilbert space, there are operators called creation operator. If you apply it to a state, it will get it to another state with one more particle of this type. If you apply it to the 0 vector, nothing will happen because it will stay 0. You have to apply it to a real state. And the vacuum is one of the real states which have a length. It's an arrow. It's a specific arrow with specific features, but it is still an arrow with finite length, non-vanishing length. That's the real physical vacuum, which shows you the difference logically and rationally in mathematical terms between the physical vacuum, which is a real state which has a certain length, meaning a certain probability to be available, but it's sometimes available. If you empty the system sufficiently well, you get to the vacuum. Sometimes it's just asymptotically, you will be able to reach it, but it is available. And the 0 state, the 0, completely 0, which is not a state here, it's 0 vector, which is nothingness. Nothingness, you can apply all creation operators of the universe, nothing will happen, it will stay 0. You can try to stretch it, it will stay 0. You can shrink it, stay 0. So in this mathematical model, the 0 is the absolute nothingness. The vacuum is a certain vector, complicated, yes, with so many parameters, unbelievably complex, mind-blowing complex. I think it's a simple thing which fluctuates all the time like an ocean of bubbling and so on. It must be an extremely complex thing. And the space is actually not two-dimensional. The Hilbert space is infinite dimensional. There's so many parameters, infinite dimension, and only mathematician with a bit of skill will be able to handle this beast. But it can be managed. It is done. There's the presentation of it. I have worked with it. Many people have worked with it. They know how to deal with it. But keep always in mind, go back to your simple-mindedness, which you have maybe deserted by doing all these complex problems. I think, again, as a physicist, because that's not for the common people, we have the zero vector, which is not a state, the physical state. It's just an impossibility, the absolute nothingness. From that one, we cannot create anything. So keep that in mind, that you become humble and recognize that all what you are doing is that you are assuming you are already having a physical ground state. You are having an existing reality and you are working with it. If you want to go outside of that, how this whole space has come to existence, then you have to do another leap of analysis. Maybe analysis of rational type, not only purely experimental or physical type, but something else has to be done.
So when they argue this theory, are the gamma rays a fixed parameter? Because if they have to exist for the universe to be...
Yeah, all of that is already in existence. They are just working with an existing universe.
So the gamma ray isn't a fixed parameter, it can't be a fixed parameter.
No, gamma rays are just produced somewhere, ending somewhere, and going back and forth. But usually in an experiment you have to isolate that and assume a gamma ray is coming, etc., from far away. Otherwise it will become so complex you cannot study anything. That's the way experiments are done.
It has to come from somewhere.
You isolate something.
Yeah.
But if you get with this isolation carried away, your mind may deceive you, think that's the whole reality. No, it's not the whole reality. You have neglected other reality. When we are discussing rationally where the universe has come, if it has come ever from anything, then we are discussing the whole reality. Discussing the whole reality will never be accessible to an experiment. It has to be accessible to a rational analysis, if ever. My claim is that it is accessible. The fact that it's not accessible to any experiment does not mean it's not accessible to rational analysis. That's it. To the logic absolute, rational necessities. And the experimentation will give us some tools and preliminary information which will give us hints in the direction.
Do they say there are places in the universe where there's absolute nothingness exist?
No, they don't say. They have forgotten about this absolute nothingness completely. The whole universe How can it be absolute nothingness? Absolute that means it doesn't have space and time. That it is not in the universe, something else. Because space and time are part of the universe, they are features of the universe. But they forget that when you get carried away with the nice mathematical equation and develop it nicely, etc. And like even a great mind like Gödel, the one who proved that the arithmetic is not complete, is incomplete. He also constructed from the Einstein equation. The Einstein equation describes actually a family of so-called manifolds, or four-dimensional types of twisted creatures, much more complex than the torus or the donut. There's a very unwieldy entities there, some of them. You can construct many. And they're actually mathematics books, because the moment you have the structure of the equation, you can develop it mathematically. And even, for example, a Russian mathematician has written in I think in the 50s even, a complete book called Einstein Spaces. It's pure differential geometry. So this has come from physics, forget about physics, now we do mathematics. Or classifying all kinds of possible manifolds. He constructed a universe, called the Gödel universe, in which it's very well possible to go back in time to meet yourself. So, this is quite shocking. But this universe is actually empty, it has no matter. Question, nobody, I think, some people may have studied, if we have put even just one particle there, what will happen? I'm sure it will never be like that. The proof is actually what's there is that you have closed time-like loops. So you have loops which close in time, meaning you can go back in time and meet yourself. That's the meaning of it if you represent it in the common language. And when Gödel was asked how to prevent that you go back, if this such universe would exist, I would say the moment you have even one electron, the whole will not exist, just one empty universe, pure empty. What prevent you from going back in time and killing your grandfather? You have a contradiction, obviously. And he smiled mischievously and said, God has to take care of that. He will stop it from happening. Which is good. I think it's not a bad answer. But I would say the answer, it will not be realized. It's impossible to realize. The moment you have matter, even one electron will spoil the whole calculation. Because this is based on an empty model which is strict.
So only
strict, just space and time, just a shell. Absolutely empty shell. This exists in mathematically, yes. But this will be just an abstract manifold which can be realized. Like many things like infinities, which Professor Craig discussed, like the Hilbert Hotel, which can be full and still can accommodate for many new arriving customers, even for infinite many at the same time. There's no problem, just shift the people one by one and then accommodate for these. This is just a mathematical shell of him. So the mathematical possibility, the shell of mathematical possibility is much wider than what can be realized. Meaning, mathematical possibility, it is not producing any inconsistency and contradiction. But in real physical reality, you have to account for energy, for time, for other things which are impossible to account in the Hilbert Hotel. Cannot be realized in any real universe. But this will also lead you to another kind of indirect hint that the universe, as we know it, cannot be necessarily existing or self-sufficient. Very simple, because for to be self-sufficient, you have to have no limitation in matter of power and energy. Either you have them or you don't have. As we discussed, I think once that a necessarily existing being, if he has an attribute, then it has it in the full, utmost possible extent. Like for example, that's why the discussion will go then if this creator of the universe is a free agent, because if it is done by necessity of his own equations, and then we have again a dead universe actually, or a dead vacuum. But if he's acting as a free agent, then he must be absolutely free. Nothing can dictate to him. And to act absolutely free, you have to have something which you call knowledge. You know what you are doing. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense to be a free agent. But if you talk about an eternal being, a being without out of space and time, who has knowledge, then by necessity, because it's necessarily existing, and his knowledge is part of his attribute by necessity, he must know every knowable things. Because how can you know? How can be otherwise? Because if you start knowing nothing, then he will never learn anything, because there's nothing which can teach him. It's impossible. I even cannot teach himself. Because to teach yourself, you have to start from some information and someone start to teach him. There's nobody to teach him, so he has to teach himself. But it's not possible for an ignorant to teach himself, so it's impossible. The only thing is that he knows everything immediately, or know nothing. Either he knows everything or none, infinite or zero. There's no middle ground for an infinite.
It's just the same as always known. Always known.
Yeah, knowledge is present to him. It's part of his being that he knows everything, or he knows nothing. So there's a completely dead or absolutely alive. Nothing in between, because that's the nature of being necessary, existing being, and incontingent. Contingent being, you can start from nil, and then someone educate you. If you have the features of being capable of being educated, like human beings, and then you build knowledge bit by bit.